There are so many undefeated fighters in the UFC currently, and I've had this idea for a while to go through and predict when they will take their first loss. So that's exactly what we're going to do today. Now, there are over 40 fighters on the UFC roster who are currently undefeated, so I did have to go through and narrow it down because there's no way I could go through all 40 of them. Starting with the newly crowned featherweight champion, the man who just knocked out Alexander Volkanovski, Ilia Topuria. And it looks like Ilia might be the next long-reigning champion because there's not many guys who I think stand a good chance against him. It looks like he's going to fight sometime later in the fall in Spain, and it seems like it's going to be against Alexander Volkanovski. Now, I think Volk should take a lot more time off than just 7-8 months after those two brutal knockouts back-to-back. But Volk has stated multiple times that he will be ready to go in Spain and that he wants his immediate rematch against Ilia Topuria, which he definitely deserves. I mean, he was a champion for over 4 years. He had like 5 or 6 title defenses, but coming back so soon at his age after getting knocked out the way he did in their first fight, I do not like his chances against Ilia. And even if he did wait a year for the rematch, which I think he should take at least a year off, I think Ilia would still beat him. Volk is getting up there in age. He's 35, almost 36, I believe. And stylistically, Ilia is a very tough matchup for Volk with his pocket boxing, his combinations, his power, his submissions on the ground. So I think Ilia would beat Volk in a rematch. And then really the only other guy that stands any chance against him is Max. But we know Max is going up to lightweight. He's facing Justin Gaethje, and it looks like he's putting on a lot of size. And he already struggled to make 145 before. And he could decide to stay at 155, especially if he beats Justin Gaethje, because there's a strong chance he get a title shot. He doesn't have to cut as much weight. He probably feels much stronger up there. But if he does come back down, I do think he is Ilia's toughest matchup at 145. He's got good takedown defense. He'd be able to stuff a lot of, if not all of Ilia's shots if Ilia looks to take this fight down. He's also one of the only guys who can compete with Ilia on the feet. He's a very good boxer. He can mix head kicks and leg kicks in with his boxing, and he has the chin to take Ilia's shots. But the thing is, he's fighting Justin Gaethje before, and I don't see Max coming out of that Gaethje fight unscathed. Max relies way too heavily on his chin, and Gaethje is by far the hardest hitting guy he's ever fought, and we saw last time Max went up to 155 against Dustin Poirier, who doesn't have the same amount of power as Gaethje, and every time Dustin was landing clean, he was rocking Max, and I think Justin's going to do the same, and I could potentially see Justin knocking Max out. I just don't see Max coming out of that fight the same guy, and even in some of his past fights, he's looked a little slower and older recently. So I think if and when Max and Ilia fight, I do think Ilia would beat him. Max is just way too hittable for my comfort, and I don't see Max having the same chin coming out of that Justin Gaethje fight. And then besides Max and Volk, I think Ilia beats everyone else in the division. Brian Ortega, Yair, Movsar, Arnold Allen, Josh Emmett. I think Ilia beats them all. I don't think Ilia loses until he goes up to lightweight. Then I think he probably gets his first loss. But at featherweight, I don't see this guy losing for a long time. I think he could definitely be the next long-reigning champ. Next, we're going to go to Khamzat Chimaev, who has a fight scheduled for June against Robert Whittaker. Now, I just made a video on this the other day. Go watch that if you haven't done so already. So I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I do think Robert Whittaker beats Khamzat. He's just overall the more well-rounded fighter. He should be able to defend most of the takedowns outside of that first round. That first round could be scary, but I think if Whittaker can escape that first and second round, I think he is going to take over. I think he'll be able to defend a lot of the takedowns. He has some of the best takedown defense of all time, and then just outstrike Khamzat on the feet. He is so much better of a striker, and Khamzat does not move his head at all. The jabs, the 1-2s are going to land for Whittaker all day. Plus, he's going to have the cardio advantage, and he has the added experience of knowing how to pace himself 5 rounds, whereas Khamzat has never gone 5 rounds before, and he has shown to slow down in 3-round fights, and he doesn't pace himself too well. And if he does that here and goes all out in the first round and he can't finish Robert Whittaker, then I think he's in a lot of trouble. But outside of Whittaker, I think he beats most guys in this division. I think he beats Costa, Brennan Allen, Marvin Vettori. Jared Cannonier could be a tough fight, but I think Khamzat would be able to get him down and submit him. I think he would be able to beat Israel Adesanya. Sean Strickland will be a really tough fight. I would probably favor Sean in that, and then Dricus would also be a tough fight, but I'd probably lean with Dricus. So I do think Khamzat loses his next fight to Robert Whittaker, but even if he does get past Whittaker, I think he will lose the fight after that to Dricus. And then we got Ian Garry, who just beat Jeff Neal, and he's calling out Colby Covington, and it looks like that fight might happen, and that fight makes a ton of sense. They're number 4 4-7 in the rankings, and Colby is coming off a loss, definitely has to look down, and they've both been going back and forth on social media, so it looks like that fight may happen, and if it does, I would probably favor Colby, but it depends on what version of Colby shows up. Colby is obviously an amazing wrestler. He should be able to take down Ian Garry and control him on the ground, look to transition if Ian gives up his back. If this is prime Colby or close to it, I think he would beat Ian Garry, but if this is the same Colby that showed up in the Leon fight who didn't really shoot any takedowns, he didn't really do much of anything in that fight. Now, I think it was confirmed that he did break his foot early on, which would definitely play a huge factor in why he wasn't shooting more takedowns. I would go back and forth on this fight. I probably would lean Colby to beat him. Colby kind of just seems like he has a foot out the door already, and he has a history of not wanting to fight these young guys, so who knows if this fight even happens. And outside of Colby, there's not really many fights for Ian Garry. There is Kamaru Usman, but we still don't know what he wants to do. But that's a fight that could make some sense, but I do think Usman would beat Ian Garry. There is Bilal, but Bilal definitely deserves his title shot, so I think the two most likely next opponents for him are Colby and Kamaru, and I think he loses to both. So I'll say Ian Garry loses his next fight, if not loses the fight after that. And then we got Shavkat Rakhmonov, who it looks like he's going to face Jack Della Maddalena, and that fight makes a ton of sense. Both of them are pretty equal when it comes to who deserves a title shot. So I think you do that fight for the #1 contender spot, and then in the meantime, you do Leon versus Bilal. Now, Leon versus JDM is a very interesting fight because Jack Della Maddalena has pretty good takedown defense, as he showed in the Gilbert Burns fight. And even when he did get taken down, he was still able to roll out of position, still able to scramble up from the bottom against Gilbert Burns, who has some of the best control in the UFC. And then on the feet, he's obviously an amazing boxer, has very good combinations. So I think he would be a very tough fight for Shavkat. Shavkat might struggle to get this fight to the ground. He really struggled against Wonder Boy. I mean, his wrestling is good, but is it good enough to get JDM to the ground? But at the same time, he only needs to get him down once because Shavkat is a very high-level submission artist. Gilbert doesn't really go for submissions anymore, whereas Shavkat will attack any submission you give him. He's also way bigger and stronger than Gilbert, so if he did get this fight down, JDM could be in some trouble. And he doesn't even need to take this fight down to submit him. He has shown he can submit you on the feet like he did against Jeff Neal, and his striking is very high level as well. JDM was getting tagged by overhands against Burns, and Burns isn't the highest level striker. He's very fast, very powerful, but he's not super technical. Whereas Shavkat will throw straight punches. He has a very good jab, a very good cross. He'll mix in kicks with his punches. He's very fast and powerful on the feet as well, and JDM does get caught in boxing range sometimes, but so does Shavkat. Shavkat's biggest hole is his striking defense. He just doesn't move his head at all. So JDM will definitely tag him, but Shavkat does have an amazing chin. So I think Shavkat would beat JDM. It would be a tough fight, but I think he would be able to take this fight down eventually, and he's definitely not outmatched on the feet. And then after that, he would fight for the title, most likely against Leon or Bilal. I think he runs right through Bilal, but most likely Leon. And Leon is an extremely tough fight for him. On the feet, Shavkat doesn't have much for him. He's fast, he's powerful, but Leon is just so much more technical, and the fact that Shavkat doesn't move his head. So I do think Shavkat has to take this fight down, and he really struggled to get Wonder Boy down. If you struggle to get Wonder Boy down, you're gonna have a real hard time getting Leon down, who has way better takedown defense. Now, Leon's takedown defense isn't amazing, as we've seen in the Kamaru Usman fights, but Usman is also a better wrestler than Shavkat. But the thing is, whenever Leon gets taken down, he gives up his back to try and stand up, which he could afford to do against Kamaru Usman because Usman's not going to take his back and try and submit him, but Shavkat will. So if Shavkat gets this fight down once, I think Leon's going to look to turtle to stand up the same way he always does. Shavkat's going to take his back and he's going to choke him out, but can he get this fight down? I think he will eventually, and Leon doesn't really have the power to put Shavkat away in the early rounds before he gets taken down. So I think Shavkat would beat Leon in a very competitive fight, and then I think he beats pretty much everyone else at welterweight besides Kamaru Usman. I think Usman is his toughest fight, a guy who can defend all the takedowns and then just outstrike him on the feet while having a very good chin. But I think he beats pretty much everyone else. Like, I think he beats Bilal, I think he beats Ian Garry, Gilbert Burns, Sean Brady. I think he beats all of them. And then if he eventually moves up to middleweight because he is a very big welterweight, I think that's where he'll begin to lose some fights. So I think Shavkat wins his next fight against Jack Della Maddalena, then fights for the title against Leon. I think he has a very close fight with Leon. I would lean Shavkat. And then as long as he stays away from Kamaru Usman, I think he beats pretty much everyone in the welterweight division and then doesn't lose until he goes up to middleweight. And then we go to Bo Nickal, who is fighting Cody Brundage. I expect him to run right through Brundage, and to be honest, I think Bo Nickal beats pretty much every unranked middleweight. There are a few that would give him issues, like I think Ikram would definitely beat him, but the UFC is not giving Bo Nickal to Ikram. And I think his wrestling is good enough to beat a lot of guys in the rankings. I mean, he is one of the best wrestlers in the UFC, and at his style of wrestling, I think he is the best. And his boxing and jiu-jitsu is getting better so quickly, so I don't think he'll lose for a while until he starts getting deep into the rankings. And by that point, a lot of the guys who are up there, like Sean Strickland, Israel Adesanya, Jared Cannonier, might not even be around anymore. So it's very hard to say when I think he will lose. I think it will be a few years. I don't even know if he'll fight a ranked middleweight this year. And like I said, I think his wrestling is good enough, and his explosiveness and his power is good enough to beat pretty much everyone outside of the rankings. And he's so young too, only 24 years old. He's going to get so much better. He's still 4 or 5 years out of his prime. So I think it will be a while before he loses. And then we go to Umar Nurmagomedov, and it looks like he's going to fight Corey Sandhagen next. That fight was already put together once, and then Umar did have to pull out, but it seems like nobody wants to fight Umar. They had to sign a guy from a different organization just to get him a fight. Nobody wants to fight this guy. It seems like Corey is the only one who is willing, and that's why I think he will fight Corey next. And against Corey, Umar has to get this fight to the ground. Corey is one of the best strikers, if not the best striker in that bantamweight division, but that's going to be tough because Corey is a very good wrestler, has very good takedown defense, but he does have a habit of giving up his back. We saw in the Aljamain Sterling fight just how quickly Aljo was able to get his back, and even against Rob Font, he was still doing the same thing, giving Font opportunities to take his back. And if he does that against Umar, who is not only a very high-level wrestler, but also has very good submissions, he's definitely going to get submitted. But I would lean with Corey being able to stuff a lot of the takedowns and then being the much better striker on the feet, can time knees, kicks, punches, and Umar doesn't seem to have the best chin, and his striking as a whole isn't great. So if he can't get this fight down, he's in trouble. But outside of Corey, I think he beats pretty much everyone in the division. Song Yadong and Henry Cejudo could be very tough fights, but I think he would beat them. I think he beats Cheeto. I think he beats Peter Yan. Merab is his toughest fight. I think Merab would beat him, and then Sean is a very tough fight, but I'd probably lean with Umar. So I think Umar does lose his next fight to Corey, but if he does get past Corey, he'd probably fight the winner of Sean O'Malley and Merab, which I'm very torn on, but I think both of them are very tough fights, especially Merab. So even if Umar does beat Corey, I think he'd probably lose his next fight after that. And then lastly, we got Mohamed Mokaev, who is only like a fight away from a title shot, and there are really only two guys that make sense for him. There's Brandon Royval and there's Amir Albazi. He could also potentially fight Brandon Moreno or Kai Kara France, but I think Royval makes the most sense, and both of those fights are very hard for him. Royval's a hard fight, Albazi is a hard fight, but if he does get past them, he would fight Alejandro Pantoja for the title, and I don't see him beating Pantoja. I don't see anyone beating Pantoja for a long time. I think we'll have to wait for Pantoja to age and decline and for his chin to weaken before we see him lose the title. So I think if Mokaev doesn't lose his next fight to someone like Brandon Royval, which he very well could, then I think he'd definitely lose his next fight after that to Pantoja. There's so many undefeated fighters in the UFC right now. I tried to count them all and I just couldn't, but there are well over 40. So many exciting prospects. MMA's in a great place right now. But anyways, that's the end of the video. If you are new here and you did enjoy, please be sure to subscribe, turn on post notifications, like the video, leave your prediction for when these undefeated UFC fighters will lose their O in the comments down below. I'm very curious to see what you guys say, and I'll see you guys in the next one.